Welcome to Session 3 of Health Center Association of Nebraska's On-Demand Health Center Board Series. I'm going to hand it over to Burt today to walk us through Session 3 on Board Authority Part 1. Take it away, Burt.
Thank you, Jenna. This single chapter, Board Authority, includes the majority of requirements specific to the governing board and also includes requirements generating the largest number of findings of non-compliance by governing boards during operational site visits. We're going to review this chapter in 2 sessions. Session 3 will encompass the first part of the chapter. Session 4 will encompass the latter components. The objectives of this training is to increase your understanding of HRSA's requirements and to support you in achieving full compliance. Governing boards of health centers commit considerable time and expertise to the success of the organization, and serving on the board of a health center is real work. As a board, you want to get credit during the operational site visit for your efforts and demonstrate to HRSA that you're doing your job. In addition to HRSA's specific requirements, which we're going to cover in this session and the next, you want the consultants who come to conduct the site visit to be impressed with the story told by your board records. One of the important parts is to convey that you're knowledgeable about the target population. Who is the target population? Where is the target service area? What are the barriers to access and the major health inequalities of the target population? We want the consultants to see that you're actively involved in setting the organization's direction, that you're working closely with the CEO to ensure that strategies are in place and policies and budgets are related to the strategic objectives. We want the consultants to see that as a board, you're measuring progress being made in the clinical, financial, and operational areas of your organization. How are you doing that? What reports are you receiving, and what comparisons to targets or goals are you making? We want the consultants to see that you are holding leadership accountable for the success of the organization. That includes issues such as, do you view the structure as reasonable and logical for the size and complexity and the aspirations of the organization? And are you holding the CEO accountable for his accomplishments? The story your minutes and your records tell should also show that you're engaged in expanding access and removing barriers to care. And you do this by including information about patient feedback or about community input. And finally, the story being told should indicate that you're following and that you're aware of the legal and regulatory requirements. After all, remember, the site visit is a determination of how well you know, understand, and follow HRSA's specific regulations for community health center. The framework for the HRSA site visit protocol for Chapter 19 is built around a framework of elements A, B, C, D, and E. And each of these elements has subsidiary questions. You need to remember that at any time a finding of non-compliance, even with a single subsidiary question, results in a finding of non-compliance for the entire element. Today in this session, we're going to be focusing on elements A and B, and in our next session, we'll be covering elements C, D, and E. Now, before we begin talking about elements A and B, let's look at the frequent problem areas found relative to board authority and the documentation. You'll remember, if you've been watching this series, that in session 2, we discussed the quality of documentation, and so we won't discuss it further here. Other problem areas include the lack of monthly meetings with a quorum present. And if you've been on a health center board for a number of years, you may remember there was a time in which a quorum was not necessary to get credit for the monthly meeting. And this changed with the issuance of the compliance manual in 2017. Another problem area is focused on the CEO evaluation and the documented practice, and we'll be discussing that in more detail when we discuss element C. but oftentimes the documentation for the completion of the CEO evaluation is not present. Another area of frequent problems with compliance is the board's approval of HRSA applications, budget, and scope changes. And again, we'll be discussing this when we discuss element C. And the final frequent problem area under board authority is the evaluation and approval of services, locations, and hours. Remember, we want you to get full credit for your hard work. And so in these problem areas, you need to be particularly attentive to ensuring that your documentation is adequate to show compliance. The first of the board authority elements, element A, addresses the maintenance of board authority. And this primarily has to do with the legal documents, the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, and other relevant documents. And the question that you need to be sensitive to is, do any of these documents allow any other person or entity control over HRSA mandated authorities and functions of the governing body? Have you entered into any relationships, any contracts or agreements with third parties which you have ceded to them power or control over HRSA mandated authorities and functions? Now, these first 2 points are seldom a problem. When they do emerge, it's often in marketplaces where there's been significant integration of health center functions with larger health systems, and where appropriate safeguards are not in place to ensure the integrity of the health center board. But again, this is seldom a problem. The third point, which relates to public entities who operate with co-applicant boards, is a more common problem under element A. If you're in one of those situations, you know that they can be fraught with conflicts, and those conflicts are less about the contents of the co-applicant agreement and often more about the communications, trust, and control that's shared between the public entity and the board. And again, we'll be discussing that in a bit more detail later. As it relates to these items under element A, there are a few of what I'm calling tricks of the trade. You need to be sure to review your affiliation agreements and collaborative agreements for any provisions that impact the board's HRSA mandated authorities. You need to identify any participation of a third party influencing or providing direction related to your required authorities. If you're in a situation in which you have concerns about these things, it would be prudent for you to enter into a policy that you establish which explicitly states that you're not going to cede any of your required authorities to third parties. For co-applicant board situations, you need to be familiar with the provisions of the co-applicant agreement, which is a HRSA approved document, and you need to ensure that it's both accepted and followed by both the public entity and the co-applicant board. Element B under board authority has to do with the specific contents of your articles of incorporation, bylaws, or other relevant documents. Almost always these provisions are found in the bylaws. You need to ensure that each of these required authorities is included verbatim in your bylaws. Again, tricks of the trade. You need to confirm that these required authorities are in your legal documents. When HRSA mandates that you have a provision, the safest practice is to copy and use the HRSA provided language. There's no need to rewrite and put in your own words what HRSA is mandating. And you need to annually review the bylaws to confirm inclusion of these requirements. And you need to compare your requirements to those in the most recent version of the compliance manual and the site visit protocol. And certainly, if you have a site visit upcoming, you need to be particularly attentive to this review. Okay, we've quickly covered elements A and B of the Board Authority chapter, and we will now transition back to Jenna to wrap up this session. We'll be covering the other elements in session 4. Jenna, take it away.
Thank you so much, Burt. We look forward to welcoming everyone back for session 4 of the series. If you need any additional information, you can find Burt and my contact information on this slide. We hope that you join us for session 4 as Burt wraps up C through E on board authority next time. Thank you so much.